I still remember the sound the ocean made on my first night, how it pressed against the hull like something alive, constant, quiet, but impossible to ignore. People think the waves are peaceful. They're not. Not when you sleep 4 decks below sea level with no windows, no sunlight, and a job that doesn't care if you're sick, sad, or sleep-deprived. Out there, in the middle of the ocean, you learn fast that the rules are different. Or maybe there are no rules at all. Not really. I worked on a cruise ship for almost 3 years. 3 years of smiling until my jaw ached, cleaning up messes that no one was supposed to know about, and learning things that still keep me up at night. If you've ever taken a cruise, I can almost guarantee you've walked right past someone like me, in the uniform, the polite grin, the too cheerful, good morning. And you probably never wondered what our lives were like once we disappeared behind the crew-only doors. I used to be like you. I thought cruise ships were glamorous, floating cities with endless buffets, shows, pools, and sunshine. I imagined travel, adventure, maybe even a little romance. I was in my early 20s, broke, restless, and naive enough to believe the recruiting poster. It said I'd see the world. What it didn't say was that I'd spend most of it inside a metal box, working 14-hour days, 7 days a week, for a paycheck that wouldn't even cover rent back home. But that's how it starts, right? They promised just enough to make you say yes. The training was quick, basic, and mostly focused on how to smile through anything. You're taught how to nod when passengers yell, how to keep your voice light when you're told to go fetch someone more senior, how to apologize for things you didn't do, and how to disappear when someone important walks by. On my first day on board, they took our passports. Just collected them in a little folder and said it was for safekeeping. That should have been a red flag, but I handed mine over without question. Everyone did. We'd already signed our contracts, gotten our tiny cabins, 2 bunks, 1 sink, no privacy, and been assigned our departments. Mine was housekeeping. Not the worst, but not great either. You're invisible until something goes wrong. There are things you see on cruise ships that don't get mentioned in the brochures. A man died in his sleep on day 4 of my first voyage. He was still in bed when his wife came down for breakfast. Security wheeled him out at 2 a.m. under a white sheet. We were told not to talk about it. Passengers were never informed. His room was reassigned within 36 hours. The sheets were burned. That's not policy, it's just what we do when bleach won't fix the stain. They called it a silent recovery. There's a name for everything, even the unspoken horrors. But that wasn't the part that got to me. It was how normal it all was. The crew barely blinked. Some of them joked. I remember one of the older stewards, a Filipino guy named Luis, looked at me and said, "Get used to it. First dead body's the hardest. After that, it's just housekeeping." You probably don't know this, but when a guest goes missing at sea, which happens more often than you'd think, there's a whole protocol designed not to find them, but to minimize impact. You'd think people would notice. But with over 3,000 guests on board, one person slipping through the cracks, well, it's easy to blame alcohol, seasickness, sunstroke. People wander off. People fall. And if it happens after midnight and there's no camera footage, well, they didn't exist anymore. At least, not officially. We were told not to speculate. To say nothing unless spoken to, and, even then, defer to management. I didn't understand, not at first. But after a while, you get it. Cruises aren't about safety. They're about illusion. Everyone is there to believe in the fantasy, that the food is endless, the staff is happy, the ocean is harmless. Our job was to protect that fantasy at all costs. Sometimes that meant covering up accidents. Other times, it meant making sure certain things never made it to the passenger decks. I once found a needle in a cruise stairwell, buried in a bundle of laundry someone had dumped there. I reported it. The next day, I was told never to take that route again. Nothing else was said. And yet, I stayed. That's the part one wrestle with the most. Even after the first death. Even after the sexual harassment that went unpunished, the fights between staff that got hushed, the girl who got drunk on shore leave and never came back. I stayed because the job gave me something to hold on to. A sense of purpose, maybe? Or maybe I was just too exhausted to quit. You stop feeling like a person after a while. You become part of the ship, another cog in the machine. You get used to the smell of recycled air, the flicker of fluorescent lights, the low hum of the engine that never, ever stops. You count days by port arrivals. You sleep in a room the size of a walk-in closet with no windows and no locks. You eat food that's one step above animal feed and smile for passengers who don't know your name. And all the while, you learn the rules no one talks about. Like what to do when someone vanishes. What not to say when someone bleeds. How to keep moving when someone screams behind a closed door. The ocean doesn't keep secrets. It just swallows them. And for 3 years, I was part of what fed it. Before the noise, before the strange silences, before the fluorescent lights and the windowless walls. I actually thought I was lucky. I applied on a whim. I was 23, newly jobless, recently heartbroken, and stuck in a one-bedroom apartment that always smelled like damp carpet and someone else's microwave dinners. There was this ad I kept seeing online. Travel the world. Make money. No experience necessary. I must have clicked it out of boredom. The photos were all the same. Tan, smiling crew members posing on exotic beaches, arms linked, sunsets behind them like movie backdrops. It felt like the kind of adventure I used to dream about in college, back when the idea of taking off and starting over still felt romantic instead of reckless. The interview was virtual, blurry webcam, chirpy recruiter, lots of buzzwords like fast-paced, team-oriented, guest-first environment. I told them I'd worked in hospitality before, which was half true. I'd bartended during undergrad and spent 2 miserable months in a hotel laundry room folding towels that always smelled faintly of bleach and body spray. But the recruiter barely cared. She smiled a lot, asked if I could handle long hours, smiled again when I said yes. Then she said the thing that sealed it. You'll see places most people only dream of, and you'll get paid to do it. It sounded so good. I was broke. I was restless. I wanted a story to tell. The first red flag didn't come until the medical screening. They make you go through a series of checkups before you're cleared to join a ship. Blood tests, vision, hearing, basic mental health evaluations. What struck me wasn't the tests themselves, but how rushed and impersonal the whole thing was. I remember standing in a waiting room filled with people who didn't speak the same language, flipping through laminated sheets that explained how to spot norovirus symptoms and why diarrhea on a ship could get you fired. They called it a zero-tolerance illness. I signed papers I barely read. Waivers, agreements, a long contract that mentioned something about arbitration and international waters, but by then I'd stopped paying attention. I'd already told everyone I was leaving. I'd already posted about it. New job. Life at sea. The likes came in fast. People were jealous. They thought I was brave. I felt brave for about a week. They flew me to Miami and put me up in a hotel the night before embarkation. That's what they call it, embarkation day. Sounds dramatic, right? Like the beginning of an expedition. In reality, it was 12 hours of lines, security screenings, paperwork, uniforms, orientations, and standing around holding a bag you'd packed for 7 months. That's how long the contract was, 7 months without a single day off. They don't tell you that on the website. There were hundreds of us, crew from the Philippines, Indonesia, India, South Africa, Ukraine, Brazil. Some were veterans, bouncing from ship to ship. Some had been at sea for over a decade. Most had families they sent money to. They called the ship, the contract, like it wasn't a place but a sentence. That should have told me something too. But I was still wrapped in that early thrill, the sense that I was part of something big. And the ship was big. Nearly 4,000 passengers. 20 decks. Multiple pools, bars, restaurants, 2 theaters, a rock-climbing wall, a spa. Walking through it for the first time was like entering a theme park combined with a shopping mall attached to a resort built inside a maze. It felt impossible that it all floated. I kept thinking, this is what people pay thousands for. And I'm here for free. Except it wasn't free. The cost just looked different. Our living quarters were buried deep beneath the passenger decks. Crew cabins don't have numbers, they have codes. Mine was 2F128. The 2 meant 2 levels above the engine room. The F meant forward. That's important, because when the ship hits rough waters, the forward cabins are the worst. You feel everything up there. Everything. Like your stomach's trying to leave your body. There's a small hallway the crew call the I-95. It runs down the middle of Deck 1 and connects the entire length of the ship. It's loud, fluorescent lit, always busy. That's where we moved, like veins inside a steel body. The passengers never see it. We weren't allowed to take the guest elevators, even when hauling 40-pound laundry bags. There were cameras in the stairwells to make sure we stayed invisible. At the safety briefing, they told us how many people had died on cruise ships in the past 5 years. Not because they cared, because they wanted us to know what not to do. No drinking in guest areas. No fraternizing. No stepping out of line. And absolutely no going overboard. They say that like it's a joke. But it happens. Not often enough to make headlines. Just often enough that every crew member knows someone who knew someone. You'd be surprised how fast someone can disappear in the middle of the night. And how slow the response is when they do. But that was still months away. In the beginning, I believed I could handle it. I kept my head down. I memorized the codes for towels, sheets, minibar replacements. I practiced my smile in the mirror, even when I didn't feel like smiling. Especially then. That's the job, happy, always happy. What I didn't know yet was how fake everything had to be. How much of the job was pretending. Not just for the guests, but for yourself. Pretending the hours didn't hurt. Pretending the crew parties were fun, not just desperation in disguise. Pretending the rules made sense, even when they didn't. I remember the first time I got docked for being late. I was 3 minutes behind. My supervisor didn't yell. She just handed me a warning slip, already filled out. "Sign here," she said. Like it was normal. Like punishment was automatic. And in a way, it was. By the end of that first week, the fantasy had already started to crack. Not break. Not yet. Just the faintest hairline fractures, easy to ignore if you weren't looking too closely. But I was looking. And soon, I'd see things I wish I hadn't. The ship has 2 worlds. There's the one you see, the glossy, smiling, choreographed illusion where nothing ever goes wrong. The stage shows always start on time. The food is always hot. The towels are always folded into elephants. Guests roam sun-drenched decks in flip-flops, holding fruity drinks with ridiculous names and thinking they've found paradise at sea. And then there's the other world. The one buried beneath your feet. Down below, everything feels closer, louder, heavier. You can hear the machinery throbbing through the walls. You can smell oil and mold and overcooked rice. The corridors are tight, barely wide enough for 2 people to pass without touching shoulders, and they hum constantly, like the ship itself is breathing. This is where the real ship lives. The one no guest is ever supposed to see. My cabin was on Deck 2F, but most of my work happened on Deck 1 and below, places with no names, just numbers. The laundry facility was down there, and the incinerator room. There's a morgue too. Tiny, maybe 2 compartments at most. We never talked about it unless we had to. There's also something called the provision area. It's where all the food is stored, row after row of industrial refrigerators stacked with vacuum-sealed meats, frozen pastries, eggs in giant crates. Enough food to feed 4,000 passengers and 1,200 crew for weeks at sea. Every item is counted, labeled, tracked. Waste is discouraged. Severely. You could be written up for throwing away a moldy banana if it wasn't signed off by a supervisor. What most passengers don't realize is that we're constantly running low. Every cruise starts with a full load of supplies, but as the days go on, everything is rationed tighter and tighter. That's why your fresh fruit options start looking less fresh by day 7. Why some menu items mysteriously vanish mid-voyage. The logistics are a nightmare, and mistakes can be dangerous. I once saw a prep cook get scalded because the steam table overflowed. He didn't scream, just clenched his jaw while the supervisor checked the clock. An accident during peak meal prep was inconvenient. So they wrapped his hand in ice and told him to come back after lunch service. He didn't argue. None of us did. There was nowhere to go, even if you wanted to fight back. Out there, you're not protected by any country's labor laws. Not really. Once we left port, we were at the mercy of maritime law, and that basically means the company decides what's right. One of the first things I noticed was how hard it was to sleep. It wasn't just the noise, though the constant thrum of the engines never truly stopped. It was the knowledge that someone could walk into my cabin at any time. There were no locks. Crew cabins are subject to random inspections, wellness checks, or whatever excuse they come up with. I once had 2 officers walk in while I was changing. They didn't apologize. Just said they were checking for unauthorized alcohol. Then they left. You learn to sleep with one eye open. The crew mess, our dining area, was another surprise. The food wasn't bad, at least not at first. Lots of rice, lentils, fish, sometimes chicken. Nothing was seasoned much, and the meat always tasted slightly off. I avoided the mystery meat after someone joked that it was leftovers from the guest buffet. It might have been a joke. I never found out for sure. What struck me most was how segregated it was, not just by department, but by nationality. You'd see groups of Filipinos at one table, Indians at another, Ukrainians at another. It wasn't hostility, just survival. People stuck to their own. It made things easier. Safer. The more time you spent with people from your own country, the more protected you were. I didn't have that luxury. I was one of the few Americans working below deck. Most of the other Westerners were entertainment staff, dancers, singers, performers. They lived in slightly better cabins and wore nicer uniforms. We weren't supposed to mingle. The hierarchy on a ship is rigid. You could tell someone's status by the color of their badge, their uniform, even how they walked. Officers, usually white men in crisp whites, moved through the halls like they owned the place. Because they did. Below them were the staff, guest-facing roles like bartenders, waiters, spa workers. Then came the crew. That was us. The invisible engine. There was this unspoken understanding that you stayed in your lane. Don't make friends outside your rank. Don't be seen in the wrong place at the wrong time. Don't complain. There were cameras everywhere, even in the crew gym. That's how they caught one guy, misusing equipment. His contract was terminated the next day. We all knew what that meant. Terminated was the term they used for being dropped off at the next port, usually without notice. No return flight. No severance. Just gone. You'd show up to breakfast and someone's bunk would be empty. No one talked about it. And yet, the ship was always smiling. That was the part that unsettled me most, the forced cheer. No matter how tired, how sore, how scared you felt, you were expected to smile the moment you entered guest areas. They called it switching on. Like you were a light bulb. Like you weren't real until the passengers were watching. If you broke character, even once, you could be reported by a guest. Enough reports and you were gone. Just like that. I started to notice how many of the smiles around me didn't reach the eyes. How many of my coworkers stared straight ahead when they thought no one was watching. Like they were somewhere else entirely. Sometimes I'd stand in the service hallway behind one of the guest restaurants and just listen. On one side of the door, laughter, clinking glasses, soft music. On the other side, barking supervisors, aching feet, the smell of sweat and bleach. 2 inches of steel. 2 different worlds. And the longer I stayed, the more I realized only one of those worlds was real. Sleep stopped meaning anything after the first month. You sleep when you can. An hour here, 2 hours there. But it's never restful, not when you're sharing a cabin with someone on a different shift who comes and goes at random hours, slamming lockers, using the sink, making calls home when it's midnight in your time zone and midday in theirs. I remember lying on my top bunk at 3 a.m., fully awake, listening to my cabin mate crying quietly into her pillow below me. I didn't say anything. I just stared at the ceiling, tracing the faint rust stains around the air vent and wondering if she'd get written up for emotional instability if anyone reported her. That's a real thing, by the way, too much, negative attitude, and you're flagged for possible reassignment or dismissal. They won't say it's because you're depressed. They'll just say you're not a good fit for the on-board environment. The irony is, They give you a pamphlet during training about mental health resources, like there's a ship therapist waiting for you down on deck -1. But really, all it says is talk to your supervisor, which is another way of saying keep it to yourself. So we did. People coped however they could. Some drank hard. Crew parties were legendary for all the wrong reasons: cheap vodka, dim lights, bad karaoke, and the kind of desperate laughter that turns brittle by the end of the night. Hookups were constant. Not romantic, not even personal. Just something to make the hours pass faster. Something to remind you you're still alive. There was a girl from Romania, Anna. She was my age. Housekeeping like me, but on a different rotation. I ran into her sometimes during linen exchanges or meal breaks. Always smiling. Always cheerful. Until she wasn't. One morning, she didn't show up for her shift. They called her cabin. No answer. Her roommate said she hadn't come back the night before. Rumors started immediately. Maybe she went ashore and missed the call. Maybe she snuck into a guest cabin and got caught. Maybe she quit and didn't tell anyone. All guesses. They found her eventually. Not overboard. Just locked in a supply closet behind the spa. Passed out. Dehydrated. Pills, they said. She got medevaced off at the next port. Quietly. No announcements. No explanation. Her name was never mentioned again. I kept thinking about how often I'd seen her smile. How natural it had looked. People say cruise ships are like little cities. But they're not. They're more like sealed ecosystems, completely self-contained, always in motion, and entirely dependent on everything functioning just right. And when something goes wrong, there's nowhere to go. You're stuck. I remember the first time I saw a fire on board. It wasn't huge, just a fryer flare-up in one of the guest kitchens. But the smoke spread fast. Thick, chemical-smelling. I was on linen duty that day, wheeling a cart down service corridor C when the alarm hit. It wasn't a loud, blaring bell like you'd expect. It was a soft tone followed by a calm, automated voice. Code Bravo. Code Bravo. Section 3. Galley 5. Only crew understand what that means. Passengers never hear it. That's by design. We're trained for this. Muster stations, backup protocols, smoke masks, evacuation routes. But when it actually happens, your body doesn't care how many drills you've done. You panic. Everyone does, even the officers. You smell burning oil and for a second you think, this is it. This is how the whole thing goes down. It didn't. They got it under control quickly. No injuries. But I never forgot the way it felt. The way the crew looked at each other afterward, wide-eyed, silent, like we all understood just how fragile the whole system really was. The ship is always one mistake away from chaos. One broken pipe. One contaminated water tank. One passenger with a highly contagious stomach virus. It happens more than you'd think. In fact, every cruise has at least one case of norovirus. Usually more. We were trained to spot the signs: vomiting, diarrhea, fever, and report it discreetly. Guests were quietly quarantined in their cabins. Sometimes they got free drink vouchers as compensation. But they were never told why. Not really. It was all about optics. Everything had to look perfect. That was the unspoken rule. I remember once, a pipe burst in a crew hallway. Sewage, not water. It leaked into 2 cabins, including one where a woman had just come off a double shift. She was still inside when it started seeping under the door. I helped her carry her things to an emergency bunk room while she cried, clutching a plastic bag of damp clothes. Facilities took 2 days to fix it. She was never offered a replacement uniform. She had to wear her roommates for the rest of the week. But no one complained. Because complaining doesn't change anything. It just puts a target on your back. That's when it really started to sink in that this place didn't just run on routine. It ran on silence. Silence when something goes wrong. Silence when someone breaks. Silence when the cracks in the ship start to mirror the cracks in you. I stopped smiling so much after that. Not where passengers could see, of course. But when I was alone. When I was brushing my teeth at midnight under flickering lights, trying not to cry because my body ached and I hadn't spoken to my family in weeks. The Wi-Fi cost more than I could afford. I rationed texts like food. Still, I told myself I was lucky. That I was learning discipline. Seeing the world. Earning money. It's amazing how long you can convince yourself something's worth it, just because you're already too deep inside to leave. But the ship doesn't care what it takes from you. And the deeper you go, the harder it gets to remember who you were before it took hold. There's the official economy, the one the company controls, and then there's the other one. The one that keeps you fed when you miss dinner. The one that gets you clean uniforms when laundry's backed up for 3 days. The one that exists in glances, nods, whispered trades in narrow hallways, and folded bills passed discreetly between calloused fingers. Every ship has one. Ours was no different. At first, I didn't notice it. I was still too focused on surviving, keeping my numbers clean, avoiding write-ups, learning how to work just fast enough to meet quotas without collapsing. But after a while, I started to see the patterns. The quiet handoffs. The unmarked bags left outside cabin doors. The way certain crew always had fresh fruit or extra energy drinks when everyone else was scraping by on stale rolls and cold rice. It wasn't black market stuff, not really. It was smaller than that. More subtle. See, everything on board is tracked. Every roll of toilet paper, every tea bag, every portion of scrambled eggs. You can't just go to the kitchen and ask for more. Even if you're hungry. Even if you haven't eaten in 12 hours. If it's not in your designated meal time or ration portion, you're out of luck. Unless you know someone. Unless you're willing to trade. Laundry staff had access to uniforms and linens. Galley workers could sneak out extra bread or fruit. Bar staff sometimes stashed bottles of alcohol in maintenance closets for a price. If you worked security, you had power, soft power, but valuable. You could ignore minor infractions or make someone's problem disappear for a favor. My first trade was for a real pillow. Not the pancake-thin one the company issued, but an actual, full pillow with memory foam and a clean case. A girl in provisioning got it for me. I gave her a half-used bottle of Victoria's Secret body spray in return. I don't even remember where I'd packed it from. Maybe home. Maybe an airport layover. But she wanted it. Said it reminded her of her sister. That's what it was like. A barter system built on nostalgia, cravings, comfort. Things you couldn't request through formal channels. Shampoo that didn't smell like industrial soap. Instant noodles with spice packets. A cracked iPhone with an international SIM card. Clean socks. One guy had a stash of Wi-Fi vouchers he sold off in secret $5 for 15 minutes of internet, enough to send a message home or check your bank account. We all knew it wasn't allowed. But no one reported him. Because sometimes those 15 minutes were all that kept you from losing your mind. There were also people who could get things done. Quiet fixers. You learned their names fast. If your cabin light shorted out and facilities kept brushing you off, you went to Marcos. He'd rig it with a spare from the storeroom. If your bunk was crawling with bed bugs, which happened more than once, you found Yana. She knew how to get pest control in quietly without triggering a room inspection. No one wanted inspections. Ever. Inspections meant attention. And attention was dangerous. There was a story that went around about a cabin that got flagged during a random sweep. Mold on the ceiling, electrical wiring exposed, one bunk sagging in the middle like a hammock. Instead of fixing it, they reassigned the crew members and locked the room. Just sealed it off. As if the problem didn't exist if no one lived in it. Some said there were whole sections of unused cabins down on Deck B that were too damaged to house anyone. Others said they were being saved for emergencies, like isolation rooms for when passengers got sick. I never found out for sure. We weren't supposed to go down there. And then there were the relationships. I don't mean romance. I mean strategic alliances. People who looked out for each other because they had to. One girl I knew, Mary Saul, always shared her fruit stash with an older dishwasher named Henry. In return, he saved her a seat at dinner and covered for her when she needed to sneak off for an extra break. It wasn't friendship, not exactly. More like survival-based loyalty. You needed people. No one made it alone. Except the ones who tried. And they never lasted long. I started to understand that the official systems on board were more like suggestions. The real rules lived between the lines. The ship ran on favors, silence, and debt. Not money, but reputation. If you helped people, they remembered. If you caused trouble, they remembered that too. Once, I helped a girl get out of a mandatory safety drill. She had a fever, could barely stand, but no one wanted to report her for illness. It meant automatic quarantine. If the company found out, they'd isolate her in a steel room below deck 1 with nothing but a cot and a sink, then send her home unpaid. So I clocked her in under my name. Risked getting written up. Never got caught. 3 weeks later, she slipped me a sealed envelope with 2 painkillers, a pack of gum, and a tiny folded note that said, "You ever need something, anything, find me." I still have that note. You hold on to things like that. You don't even know why. Maybe just to feel like someone's got your back. Even in a place where everything else feels transactional. The longer I was there, the more I understood that the ship didn't run because of the systems. It ran in spite of them. Because of the quiet trades, the whispered warnings, the favors nobody saw. That's how the real ship stayed afloat. There's a point where you stop being shocked. Where the things that would have once made you freeze, speak up, push back, those things start to feel ordinary. Not okay exactly. Just expected. It didn't happen all at once. It crept in slowly. Like rust on steel, quiet, corrosive, patient. It started with the small stuff. Guests snapping their fingers at you like you were a dog. Complaining that their pillow didn't feel expensive enough. Demanding fresh towels every 2 hours, then leaving them in a soaked heap in the hallway. Calling us the help to our faces. That kind of thing was constant. You learned to let it slide. But sometimes, it went darker than that. There was this guest, middle-aged, wealthy, always dressed like he'd walked off a yacht catalog. He was polite. Overly polite. Called me, "Miss," every time he passed me in the hallway. Smiled too long. One night, he slipped a folded bill into my hand when I brought fresh towels to his room. I didn't think much of it. Some guests tipped, even though we weren't supposed to accept cash. But then he asked if I wanted to come inside. Said he had wine. "You look tired," he said. "You deserve a break." I told him no. Smiled. Backed away. The next day, he left a note on his door. Request same stewardess as last night. I brought it to my supervisor. She shrugged. "He's a VIP," she said. "Just switch with someone else for a few days." And that was that. No incident report. No follow-up. Just quiet reassignment. That's the thing people don't realize, how often things get smoothed over. Repositioned. Disappeared. Especially when it comes to passengers. Especially the ones who spend money. There's an unofficial rule. The more they pay, the more we look the other way. I once saw a guest scream at a bartender, full volume, spitting mad, because his cocktail didn't have enough character. Whatever that means. He knocked the drink onto the floor and demanded it be cleaned up immediately. When security arrived, they apologized to him. Sent the bartender on rest rotation for the next 2 days. You can't win. You just endure. But that wasn't the worst of it. The worst came from the quiet ones. The ones who smiled just enough. Asked just enough questions. Knew exactly how far they could push. A girl from housekeeping, Nina, once confided in me after a long shift. She'd been cleaning a suite when she found a hidden camera. Tucked behind the curtain rod, aimed at the bed. Not ship-issued. Personal. She wasn't even supposed to touch anything electronic, but something felt off. So she reported it. Management handled it. That's what they told her. It's being taken care of. 2 days later, she was transferred to a lower deck, cleaning crew toilets. Not punished, exactly. Just repositioned. It was subtle. Quiet. But everyone got the message. There's something deeply unsettling about working in a place where people vanish sideways. Where speaking up doesn't get you heard, it gets you moved. Where protect the guest experience trumps everything else, even basic decency. And guess, well, some of them know that. They understand the power imbalance. They can feel it. And the ones who are inclined to exploit it, do. There was a rumor, whispered in laundry rooms and crew stairwells about certain men, repeat guests, who specifically booked cabins in areas known for newer, younger housekeeping staff. One name kept coming up, again and again. I won't say it, but people recognized him. He knew the rules. Knew when inspections happened, when rotations switched, how to avoid drawing attention. Someone asked once why he was allowed back on board. Why, after 2 official complaints, he still had access. The answer? He was a platinum-level member. Booked full suites. Left 5-figure tips for management. You do the math. Over time, you learn to shut down parts of yourself just to get through the day. You learn to wear your uniform like armor. Smile. Nod. Never engage too much. Never linger. You get good at being invisible when it's safe and visible when it's required. And when the ship docks for port days and the guests rush off with their cameras and day passes and suntan lotion, the crew stays behind. Because that's when the deep cleaning happens. That's when supplies are restocked. That's when broken furniture is quietly replaced, carpet stains are scrubbed with industrial solvents, and rooms are rekeyed without explanation. I once had to clean a cabin that still smelled like blood. They never told me what happened. Just handed me gloves and a bleach bottle. Said, take your time. It wasn't a lot. Just a dark smear along the mattress edge, a handprint on the tile. Could have been anything. An accident. A nosebleed. A fight. But when I asked, no one answered. They just looked away. You learn not to ask too much. Curiosity gets you reassigned. Or worse, noticed. The longer I stayed, the more I realized that silence wasn't just survival, it was expected. Built in. Trained. We weren't supposed to intervene. Not supposed to investigate. Just clean it up. Smile. Move on. The line between doing your job and enabling something darker wasn't drawn in black and white. It was a blur. And once you crossed it, you stopped seeing it at all. You just kept walking forward. Kept serving. Kept pretending you didn't know the things you knew. And the ship kept floating. Because as long as the guests were happy, nothing else mattered. There's something uniquely disorienting about seeing the same sunrise over and over again, but from a different part of the world. After a while, it all starts to blur, port cities, dockyards, shorelines framed by shipping containers and tourists with sunburns. You start to lose track of where you are. And then, eventually, who you are. I don't say that for effect. I say it because it's true. When you live by someone else's schedule, every minute tracked, every meal rationed, every interaction scripted, you become diluted. Like something once sharp that's been soaked too long in salt water. The edges start to soften. Your thoughts don't feel like your own anymore. But your memories, those stay sharp. Too sharp sometimes. I remember the girl who disappeared. Not a guest. One of ours. Her name was Jia. Early 20s. Food prep. Quiet, but always smiling in the crew mess. We weren't close, but we'd spoken a few times briefly between shifts. She always carried a little notebook with her, filled with doodles. Flowers, birds, tiny sketches of places we passed in port. She'd once shown me a drawing of the Lisbon skyline from the crew deck, said she wanted to be a designer someday. Save up, take classes, start over. And then one morning, she just wasn't there. No one said anything at first. People miss shifts. Sometimes they oversleep. Get food poisoning. It happens. But then breakfast came and went. Then lunch. Then dinner. Her cabin mate reported her missing by that evening. But management didn't make any announcements. They told us to keep working. Keep smiling. The next day, rumors started. Someone said she'd been seen on deck 12 late the night before, unusual, since crew weren't allowed up there during guest hours. Someone else claimed she'd gotten into an argument with a sous chef earlier that week. Another said she was struggling mentally and probably just needed time. But time passed, and she never returned. A formal report was filed, we were told. Port authorities contacted. Her belongings were packed up by security and removed from the cabin. They didn't hold a meeting. Didn't offer grief counseling. Just replaced her name on the rota and reassigned her shift. The day after that, we got an all-crew reminder. Unauthorized access to passenger decks would be treated as grounds for immediate dismissal. Nothing about Jia. Just policy. I tried asking questions quietly, carefully. One of the stewards just shook his head. Another made the sign of the cross and walked away. The girl who'd bunked next to her refused to talk at all. And I realized something that chilled me more than anything else. This had happened before. Not often. Not enough to start a riot. Just enough. Disappearances don't always mean someone went overboard. That's what people think, but it's rarely that dramatic. Sometimes they get off in port and don't come back. Sometimes they're removed quietly by security after a violation. And sometimes they're hidden in paperwork, medical disembarkation, early repatriation, personal leave. It doesn't really matter. The result is the same. They're gone. The ship sails. No one stops moving. And maybe that's what started to break me. Not the death, not the fear, but the normalcy of it. The way we all kept walking through it like ghosts in uniforms. There was another case, one that didn't make sense. A guest this time. Older man, mid-60s. Traveled alone. Mid-tier cabin. Kept to himself. One morning, his cabin was empty. No sign of him. No breakfast order. No towel pickup. Housekeeping flagged it. Security did a search. And eventually, the announcement came over the staff comms. Code Oscar. Section 7. That's the code for man overboard. They sealed the deck. Launched search protocol. Circulated a vague passenger alert. Delay in itinerary due to technical difficulty. The lifeboats were never lowered. The cameras weren't conclusive. They said he must have fallen during the night. High winds, slippery railing. Tragic accident. But I'd been on the midnight shift. I'd passed his cabin. Lights were off. Door locked. No sign of struggle. No broken railing. No disturbance. And yet, he was gone. Some said he jumped. Others said he was pushed. A few said he never existed in the first place. That's the terrifying part about the ocean. It doesn't give back what it takes. And it takes quietly. And the cruise line? They're prepared for it. They have full crisis manuals. Press templates. Legal waivers. Insurance clauses. They know how to make things disappear just as efficiently as the sea does. I remember sitting in the crew mess that night, watching people eat rice and chicken like nothing had happened. Watching the officers play cards. Watching the entertainers rehearse their next show in the lounge, laughter echoing faintly through the corridor. And I thought, does anyone really care? Or do we just learn to stop asking? I think that's when the illusion cracked for good. Not with a scream, not with a headline. Just with that quiet, empty cabin. A name that vanished from the manifest. And a ship that didn't slow down. Because it never does. The cruise industry is built on momentum. On smiling through storms. On compartmentalizing everything that doesn't serve the guest experience. And sometimes, that includes people. You can vanish out there. Physically. Emotionally. Spiritually. And no one will ask why. Because asking breaks the fantasy. And the fantasy is what keeps the whole thing afloat. You'd think the breaking point would be loud. Something dramatic. A confrontation. A scream. Someone snapping in the middle of dinner service and throwing their apron on the floor like in the movies. But that's not how it happens out here. Here, the breaking point is quiet. It's a moment where everything inside you finally folds in on itself, and you realize you're not just playing along anymore, you're a part of it. Mine came on a Tuesday. Port day in Dubrovnik. Clear skies, light breeze, deck chairs laid out like a postcard. The kind of day guests take selfies with no filters and write captions like, "Living my best life." I was assigned to guest corridor sanitation, basically, wiping down high-touch surfaces outside staterooms. Handles, rails, elevator buttons. It's one of those jobs no one notices until it's not done. And on port days, it's mostly empty halls and background music echoing through the overhead speakers. Easy, usually. Mindless. That day, I was on deck 9, midship. I noticed the door slightly ajar before I heard anything. A stateroom. Platinum level. One of the larger ones. Most guests were off the ship, wandering the old city or queuing for overpriced excursions, so it stood out. I slowed down, just enough to listen. There was a sound inside. Not music. Not a voice. A muffled thud. followed by what I can only describe as a sharp breath, like someone trying not to cry. I paused, hand on my cleaning cloth. I didn't move, just listened. Then I heard it again. A word. Faint. No. That was all. Just that one word. Small. Fragile. Wrong. I froze. I was alone in the corridor. No cameras. No other crew. No excuse to be lingering near a premium guest cabin. Every instinct I had told me to move. Keep walking. Don't interfere. But I didn't. I reached for the comm on my hip and whispered into it. Security, Deck 9, midship. Cabin 9426. Suspicious noise. Possible welfare check. No response. I tried again. Louder. Still nothing. It took another minute before I heard footsteps behind me. One of the junior security officers, barely older than I was, uniform slightly too big, walkie crackling at his side. I pointed to the door. Still ajar. Still quiet. I think someone's inside, I said. He knocked. No answer. Then he knocked again, more firmly. Announced himself. Ship security. Welfare check. Still nothing. Finally, he opened the door. What I saw, I won't describe it in detail. Not because I can't. Because I still don't fully understand what I was looking at. The guest, a man, was standing near the bed. Shirt unbuttoned. Holding a glass of wine. Calm. The woman, young, early 20s, crew uniform, was sitting on the floor beside the bed. Her face pale. Her hands trembling. I recognized her. She worked bar service. I'd seen her on crew deck a dozen times. Name tag, Layla. Her eyes met mine. Not fear. Not even shame. Just nothing. Like she was already somewhere else. Security didn't ask questions. Just asked the guest if everything was all right. He smiled. Said yes. Said we were interrupting a private conversation. Security nodded. Apologized. Closed the door. That was it. No report. No write-up. No action taken. I wanted to scream. To grab the radio and demand someone do something. But I didn't. I couldn't. Because deep down, I already knew what would happen if I did. Nothing. Or worse. Afterward, I found Layla down in the laundry bay. Alone. Sitting on a crate of folded towels. Her uniform rumpled. Face blank. I sat beside her. Didn't speak. She looked at me, finally, and said, "He's been on 5 cruises this year. Always asks for my section." Then she shrugged. Like it didn't matter anymore. Like it never had. That was the moment. The one where something in me cracked, not from shock, but from recognition. Because I realized that I had been complicit. Not in that specific moment, maybe, but in all the ones that led up to it. In the silence. In the system. In the endless tiny decisions to look away. We all were. The ship doesn't need you to be evil. It just needs you to be exhausted. To be obedient. To stay in your lane. To do your job and let someone else worry about the rest. And most days, we did. Because we had bills. Families. Dreams that got smaller with every contract. And maybe, somewhere inside, we all believed we'd leave soon. Just one more season. One more paycheck. Then we'd quit. Start over. Escape. But no one leaves clean. Not really. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my bunk, staring at the underside of the mattress above me, and thought about how easily someone can be erased. How systems don't need monsters to function. Just people willing to follow orders. Or stay quiet. Or keep walking. And I realized I couldn't pretend anymore. I couldn't unknow what I knew. I couldn't keep calling this a job when it felt more like a system built to break people quietly, slowly, invisibly. And I knew, finally, that I wouldn't come back. Not after this contract. No matter what it cost me. The last month felt like slow motion. I still did the work, folded the towels, wiped the railings, smiled when I was supposed to, but everything felt distant. Like I was moving underwater. Like the version of me that started this contract was already gone, and I was just finishing the steps because someone else had written the ending. I didn't tell anyone I wasn't coming back. Not my cabin mate. Not my supervisor. Not the few people I'd grown to trust in that quiet, sideways kind of way that passes for friendship when you live like this. It felt safer to keep it to myself. Like the moment I said it out loud, the ship might somehow find a way to stop me. Because that's the thing no one warns you about, how hard it is to leave. Not just logistically. Emotionally. You spend months living by the ship's rhythm, working when it tells you, eating when it tells you, speaking only when it's safe. You form habits so deep they feel biological. You learn to take up less space. To wait for permission. To pretend. Even when it breaks you, there's a strange comfort in the predictability. It's a trap disguised as routine. I remember one night, about 2 weeks before disembarkation, I walked the I-95 hallway alone after my shift. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead like always, and the floor buzzed faintly beneath my shoes. I knew every dent in the walls, every smell, bleach, oil, steam, feet. It should have felt like nothing. But that night it felt different. It felt like walking through the belly of something enormous and blind. Like I was inside a thing that consumed people quietly and spat them out changed. And then I remembered something. Xia, the girl who vanished. Her sketchbook. She'd carried it everywhere. I never saw it again after she disappeared. Which wouldn't have meant anything, except for one small thing. In the linen closet on deck 4, buried under a pile of old uniforms, shoved behind a box of discarded holiday decorations, I found it. I wasn't looking for it. I was grabbing extra pillowcases. But the second I saw the edge of that familiar worn notebook, I knew. It was hers. The cover was bent. A few pages were torn. But inside, her drawings. Still there. Sharp pencil lines of ports, crew, flowers, birds. And at the back, something else. A sketch of a man. Strong jaw, wide smile. No name, but I recognized him. He was crew. Worked in maintenance. Older. Always overly familiar with the younger girls. I remembered seeing him talking to her once. Too close. Too long. I brought the book to my supervisor. She looked at it, said nothing, then handed it back. You shouldn't be digging through things that aren't yours. That's all she said. I left the sketchbook where I found it. That night, I couldn't sleep again. Not because I was scared. I was past scared. I was angry. Not at him. Not at her. Not even at the supervisor who shut me down. At all of it. At the structure that protects the illusion. At the idea that a girl can disappear, and no one even asks if she had anything worth saving. That a guest can hurt someone, and the response is to make the staff more discreet. That silence is rewarded and truth is punished. You know what I realized? The ship doesn't just teach you to obey. It teaches you to forget. To let things go. To smooth them over. To scrub them clean. It makes you complicit, one task at a time. One skipped question at a time. Until one day you look in the mirror and don't recognize who's looking back. I didn't want that to be me. So I started counting down the days. 12, 10, 7. I stopped trading favors. I stopped covering shifts. I stopped pretending I couldn't hear the girl in cabin 3E crying at night when no one came to check on her. And when disembarkation finally came, I left like it was a prison gate opening. I took one last walk through the I-95, through the crew mess, past the laundry bay, past the staff elevators. I passed people I'd worked beside for months, some nodded, some didn't even look up. And when I stepped off the gangway and onto land, I didn't feel relief. I felt weight. Like I was carrying something with me that I'd never be able to put down. Underscore 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 underscore. Conclusions and reflections. It's been over a year since I stepped off that ship. I haven't gone back. I won't. For a while, I couldn't even talk about it. People didn't understand. They'd say things like, "But at least you got to travel," or you knew what you signed up for. No, I didn't. I didn't know I was signing up for a system built on exploitation, one smile at a time. I didn't know I was walking into a floating hierarchy where nationality, gender, and income determine your worth. I didn't know how many people would disappear physically, emotionally, and how few would ever be remembered. And I didn't know how easy it would be to lose parts of yourself in that machine. But I know now. And that's why I'm telling this story. Because cruise ships aren't just about sunsets and buffets and staged entertainment. They're factories. Floating illusions. And the cost of maintaining that illusion is people, real people. People like Jia. People like Layla. People like me. If you've ever taken a cruise, maybe ask yourself, who made your bed? Who cleaned your glass? Who disappeared while you were watching the ocean and never even noticed? Because behind every smile you saw was a silence someone was forced to keep. And I'm done being quiet. There are nights where I still feel like I'm back on the ship. Not in dreams. In memory. It hits at strange times, when I'm standing in a store line too long, or when I smell bleach and old air conditioning. Sometimes when I hear muffled footsteps in a hallway, or a knock on a door that comes too soft, like someone afraid of what's waiting on the other side. I don't have nightmares. What I have is something harder to name, a lingering sense that I'm still carrying all of it, somewhere just beneath the surface. Not just the memories. The knowing that thousands of people board those ships every day believing they're stepping into luxury, and never once wondering what it takes to keep it all running. It's not just hard work. It's not just long hours or low pay. It's silence. Disappearance. Systems so deeply wired to protect the illusion, they'll erase people to keep it clean. And here's the thing that really gets to me. I didn't leave because I was brave. I left because I had the privilege to. I'm from a country that gave me options. I spoke English fluently. I wasn't sending money home to feed a family. I had somewhere to return to when I stepped off that gangway. Most of them didn't. Some of the best people I met on that ship, people who worked harder than I ever could, people who smiled through things I can't even begin to explain, they're still there. Still doing double contracts. Still hiding fevers. Still sharing Wi-Fi codes and waiting for their names to show up on the next schedule. And most of them will never say what I just said. Not because they don't want to, but because it could cost them everything. So I'm saying it for them. For the ones still making beds while guests trash the room and demand more towels. For the ones still being told to smile more by people who treat them like background noise. For the ones who've watched someone disappear and had no one to tell. You don't have to boycott cruises. That's not what this is about. But if you ever find yourself on one again, look closer. Ask the name of the person cleaning your room. Tip them, even if they say you don't have to. Notice if they look tired. Notice if they flinch when someone raises their voice. If you hear a noise in the hallway that feels off, say something. Just don't pretend anymore. Because pretending is what keeps this cycle alive. We spend so much time chasing comfort, escaping, rewarding ourselves for hard work with vacations that make us feel free. But what kind of freedom is it if it rests on someone else's exhaustion? What kind of escape is it if it only exists because someone else isn't allowed to leave? And if you've ever worked in an industry like this, hospitality, cruise lines, luxury resorts, tourism, if you've ever had to smile through pain or silence yourself to keep your job, I want to hear your story. Drop it in the comments. You don't have to share details if you're not ready. Just say, I know what this feels like. You'd be surprised how many of us have been there. And if you've never worked in this world, but this story opened your eyes a little, then share it. Send it to a friend who books cruises every year. To someone who's always posting vacation photos with captions like, living like royalty. Maybe they need to know what royalty costs when you're the one changing the sheets. The truth is, I'll never look at the ocean the same way again. It used to feel endless, peaceful, pure. Now, it just reminds me of how easy it is to hide things in plain sight. How many people can vanish without a splash? How silence can sound a lot like waves. I told myself this story didn't matter for a long time. But it does. Because behind every glittering cruise ship are people like me. And we remember everything.